Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us at MY's conference. We sincerely appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to be here with us, and specifically for joining this Fireside Chat today. A few housekeeping items. Today's keynote session will begin at 2 p.m., and furthermore, there will be a welcome reception tonight in the Expo Hall from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Please remember to fill out your speaker session surveys in the mobile app. They should be available around 15 minutes upon the conclusion of today's session. And if you fill out 6 or more, you have the opportunity to earn additional free swag. And who doesn't love swag? Additionally, after this session, there will be a 45-minute break, so you can visit the Expo Hall, network, do whatever you'd like before the next session starts. And at the very end of this session, we will be doing a Q&A, time permitting. My name is Chris, and my colleague Matt were the room facilitators for this session, and we'll be running around with mics to hand to everyone during the Q&A session. So yeah, feel free to just raise your hand, and we'll come over to you. So with that, I would like to introduce Mustapha, who's the Chief Security Officer at UKG, and Taylor, who's the Director of the Office of the CISO for Google Cloud. So
Cool.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. I should add, everyone who gives this like a 5 out of 5 or a 10 out of 10 automatically qualifies for like an upgraded level of swag at the end of this. So like, please fill it out and say nice things, so we get invited back. Thank you. Cool. Well, thanks for joining us today. I'm Taylor Lehmann. As mentioned, I'm a director in the Office of the CISO. I'm also Google's healthcare security officer, so I oversee sort of all global compliance and security for health products at Google. And I'm joined by my friend and colleague Mustapha Kebbeh from UKG, formerly of Brinks, where he was the CISO there. It's now the CISO at UKG. And we're here today to talk a little bit about some interesting events that happened at UKG back in 2021. I don't know if you want to add anything to your, spice up your profile a bit.
No, thank you. I appreciate you having me here. So, as you said, just prior to UKG, I was at Brinks, where I spent about 7 years really doing a lot of transformation work. And, jumping into UKG, it's interesting, SaaS company, really going to the next level. We're a company that really supports human capital as well as payrolls and so forth. So if you look at what we do, from a company perspective, really driving day-to-day activities, the individuals as well, but supporting some of the product factors. So if you don't know what we do, we're an HR software company outside of Boston as well as in Florida. And then we really do HCM market, we do the payrolls, and we're the largest actual software company today that is privately held in the country.
Yeah, so UKG is Ultimate Software and the Kronos Group combined in a very large healthcare, very large player in the healthcare industry, which is why this is why I'm on stage with Mustapha this morning. But we're going to talk about sort of a bad day experienced by UKG to start us off, and then Mustapha's going to share a little bit about sort of what has transpired since. So everybody come back with me to 2021. It was a year of really interesting security problems. I think the year started off, everyone can remember the Colonial Pipeline experience. That was 2021, where basically the entire East Coast couldn't get gas for quite a while, as I imagine a number of other impacts stemming off of that. But Colonial Pipeline happened earlier in the year. Also that year, Microsoft announced 4 0 days in Exchange, which had led to the compromise of about 10,000 different organizations and individuals. And then, if that wasn't bad enough, Log4j hit about 2 weeks before the holidays, which meant I was working pretty much nonstop for about 3 weeks straight at Google, helping Google respond to that event. But around that time, earlier in December, many of us, again, working in healthcare, we noticed as well UKG had an outage that started, I want to say, the second week of December and lasted about 6 weeks. Immediate impact, and then following, 6 months or so of downstream impact. And that event affected about 8 million individuals. So if you take it into context of what happened earlier in that year, not that big, but what it did do was it shut down a number of hospital systems. It prevented individual nurses and others from getting paid. In fact, UKG even got sued by the New York Metro Transport Authority for being unable to pay its employees. Sued the MTA, unable to pay its employees. And so that all happened, and then later in 2022, Mustapha joined the organization. So you can imagine quite a bit of turmoil. And the reason I'm setting this up the way I'm setting it up is because I want to put all of this in context of what happened earlier that year and where UKG really fell and hit. And so Mustapha, coming into the organization, you were second time or maybe even third time CISO, but coming into UKG, what were your initial thoughts? What were your initial priorities? And how did you frame, being a post-breach CISO?
Yeah. A good question, but I want to go back to when I was at Brinks and then I saw the news, right? Oh, potentially. I also have UKG. On the other side was, I think, the clocks and then the time, which is called Dimension, or AKA Kronos, if you've used it in the past. At Brinks. So when I saw that, I was in the middle of Log4j remediations and Log4j, and the question was, what happened, right? Can I pay my customers and so forth? But we were not affected for sure, but we were tracking the incident to really understand what happened there and how could we really learn from it, right? So we were trying to reach out and so. So that's a key thing, right? As a CISO in a different company, you see a provider having security issues. You're trying to figure out really what happened and how quickly, and that information trying to trickle down. That was the one key thing. A couple of months later, tapped into joining the company, really having the context of knowing what they do and how it impacts my customers, how it impacts my HR, and the type of information, data that they have, right? Your social security numbers, your payroll, right? Your kids, family, everything is in that data. How do you come in and understand that key piece? Really joining is really understand what really happened, right? And then how do they respond to it, and what was the things that they've learned from it? So there's a lot of key important cases, as well as the really jumping into a company like that is understanding really what are they dealing with, what are the challenges, and how do you build something from there to move to the next level.
Well, I think one of the unique things too, we were catching up earlier on this, Tesla was affected by this, PepsiCo was affected by this, Whole Foods was affected by this. We had a number of huge corporate, companies, effectively, many publicly traded, many with their own stakeholders affected. And it's just thinking about your Brinks time, going back to this, you had many of the same organizations as customers there. What experiences do you think you had prior to UKG that benefited you when you got to UKG? And specifically, what were some things that you're like, oh man, thank God I had that experience prior because I need it now?
Yeah.
And then maybe what was new? What was like, oh, I didn't expect they'd be dealing with this.
So experience is, we always say this, right? Security officers or practitioners, you had to be able to communicate and collaborate, right? Because if you can't do that, you won't just know, right? If I come in with all the solution in my head and I'm just going to go just do A, B, and C, then I'm wrong, right? Because I have no idea. I think one of the key things that I think that worked well for me initially is really being able to connect, collaborate with the leaders. Not only that, but also the leaders were engaged, right? Post-breach, everyone is engaged. Really engaged, it could be a problem sometimes because they want to know what's going on. But more on the collaborations, understanding the key issues, understanding the challenges, and then taking time to really dig in, right? So I think that's a key piece, right? Understanding what's going on instead of coming in and just ramping up is taking time to really get into the details on some of the issues and the core issues, and then focusing on what do you do from a fundamental perspective. And we'll talk a little bit about foundations and going into a little bit on the fundamentals, but that's I think communication and collaborations were the key areas.
Well, I think too, to this point, right, you were coming in, getting to know a whole new group of stakeholders, learning how to communicate effectively with them, right? They're probably burned out a little bit of what just happened. Right? You also have some new board members with experience as post-breach CISOs, right? Coming in, looking over your shoulder. And you got a team that's kind of burned out after having, spent 6 months at that point, trying to, get the place back in order. I'm just curious, like coming in, understanding all the change going on. And then also, just to throw out there too, Google Cloud was now the new transformation platform. So the organization was moving all of its legacy on-prem stuff to the cloud too. So you had multiple things going on. How did you set your first priorities?
So coming in as UKG was doing great stuff. They had good plan. They have a lot of things in motion. They were working towards it. It's just a lot of things going on at the same time. But they start with the team. So talking about coming in and really understand, when you spend some time with a security team that has been there for some time, you get to know a lot, right? You get to know a lot. So I spent a lot of time with the team to really understand challenges they have, opportunities that we could actually tag into, and really understand, the burnout and how do we really make sure that we put ourselves into the right place. More importantly, I took the same approach with the other groups, right? And the other groups that will help me in the case of an incident. This could be a cloud team, this could be a communications team and a legal team to really understand their challenges and then how they responded. But I wanted to know more, right? So I said, how did we respond to the incident, right? Of course, it's no surprise, Mandian was our IR, working with them to really understand some of the components that they've seen, what they've learned from our environment, and then what they recommended. So I took all of that, bringing it together to really start thinking about what's the approach that we should take, what are the low-hanging fruits, and then how do we really start tackling that from that point of view. It's either staffing, it's either resources, it's either changing processes and procedures just to allow us to get to speed up to what we need to do.
Just jumping back, if you think back, what felt new to you in terms of that experience? What was an uncommon or unexpected sort of item that found its way in your priority list?
I think one of them is really, clocks. I haven't dealt with clocks. I've done with IoTs like trucks and that are fully IoT, but now I have to deal with clocks that are in customer locations that they're using to badge in and do so. So you have to think about that security into your environment, how that works. The second thing that felt new is we are huge in the transformation into GCP. I've worked a little bit in GCP environment that I had a lot of experience in other cloud environment. So being in that middle and speed, it's a key thing. So those are the nuances. I think the others are really, everything that you deal with in any security incident on a daily basis that you have to tackle.
So the clock thing, I think, is interesting because folks, you may have seen these Kronos devices. They're badging machines, and they're completely on their own network, but they're deployed out in the field. And I'm not entirely certain if this is true or not, but I believe that they're owned by the facility that installs them. And so updating and patching them is really challenging activity because they may not always be online. They may not be always used or being connected in a way that's expected. So managing widely distributed IoT, not just IoT in a plant that you control, but IoT in the field, I think is a sort of unique difference with this fleet of equipment.
When you have a device that sits in a customer premises, let's say I have something in a hospital, I just can't update it on the night, right? So I have to coordinate with everyone that's leveraging and using it, especially if it's a medical device or if it's a clock that's sitting in a customer premises. So those are the kind of things that you have to think about. That's one. You have to think about the customer environment. And then two, you have to think about, what happens if the customer environment get infected or the customer themselves are not. It could potentially be a risk to your organization. So those isolations are the key things that I wanted to understand day one. But then of course, like every other customers, you have different variety of product out there. Our latest clocks are more advanced in terms of the way it communicates and update, but those are the key things that I had to quickly.
No, I remember having been a CISO in healthcare, running endpoint software on my customers' environments, similar to running clocks in theirs. It was always probably my greatest point of concern because things move quickly, especially when it's out of sight. What was lingering So jumping back, coming in, setting priorities, what were some of the lingering sort of impacts of the breach?
I mean, today, I mean, it's 2 years now, right?
So we're in the long tail now.
Yeah, right. It's lingering. When you have this type of security incidents, a lot happen, right? It doesn't go away in a day or two. You can make all the tactical controls. You can put all the security stuff you want, but there are challenges out there that you have to deal with. There's the legalities that you have to walk through, and there are also the continuous improvement, because security improvement is not, does it take a day or a month? If I have $1 billion today, I can't just rip everything and say I'm secure tomorrow. So there's, you have to walk through it through iteration. I also said that we were working on migration and cloud infrastructure. So of course we have things that needed to move, and then it has to go through a different path. But as a company like UKG that's been a while, they do also have legacy stuff, right? That actually you have to think about, that you just can't sometimes lift and shift, or you have to re-platform and then take. So a couple of things that we had to do is really build the security for our environment. What do we have that we need to create security around our on-premises or private data center, and then how do we actually think about our next generation public cloud with partnership with Google Cloud.
So one more, immediate question immediately following. I got to imagine your team was like feeling the effects of doing IR for 6 months at that point, if not still doing it to some degree. How did you approach your team and, sort of patching up, which was probably a large group of burned out people who was tired and needed help and support? How did you approach, helping them recovering back to sort of a state where you could be flexible, move forward, but also, acknowledge the effort that had gone into getting it sort of at least back to where it was?
You and I talked about this, prior to UKG. I have a lot of experience in incident response and really diving into that. And some of the key things that we were trying to do there is really understand what do we need to do continuously? How do we need to prepare our teams? And then this is in collaboration with the Mandian team, incident response, with my security team, to create our new model of how do we really make sure that we have some eyes there. We're using threat intel-based AI capability and really fine-tuning. How do we respond to this? But more also building some automation capabilities around us and training our team. Sometimes it takes time to really build that, but from an AI perspective and processes is really adding additional capacity and capability for the team.
Yeah.
Working also tandem with the Google Mandian team to really help and be ready for anything that could potentially.
So automation, and then also just sort of getting more and better information into the hands of defenders in your org.
Absolutely. The type of data we have and then the infrastructure, you have to be ready. So we focus on threat intel-based defense in terms of incident response, right? Mm-hmm. How do you respond to this key types of threat within your environment? How do you really move that all the way down to containment, right, within minutes, not hours, right, within minutes? And what do you do with those? And then some of those gaps are the gaps that you identify and start working towards closing that over time.
Oh, that makes sense. I mentioned in the sort of prologue, customers suing their, employees of customers suing their employers, folks not getting paid right before the holidays.
Yes.
I have to imagine this was customers of UKG at that point probably were questioning their decision to have UKG as their payroll provider or services provider. And I got to imagine that was a key part of coming in, was to reestablish that trust with them. Tell me about how you approach that set of problems, and where you sit today.
Trust with customers or trust with anyone, it's a key thing, right? You don't enforce that happens. When we look at our environment and like every other company, right, that could potentially have a security incident, is how do you get away from that? How do you bounce back from that? I think it's clarity, communication with your customers, and be transparent as much as possible. I think what we've done is look at everything that we've seen, right? The reason why I'm sitting here talking about this, or many days talking about it in many other areas, is to really provide context to what happened, right? And then how did we really, what did we learn from it, and then what are we doing to make sure that we took care of that in terms of putting security guardrails, putting controls to reduce that risk, right? The biggest companies in the world will have security issues. Mandiant had one. What did they do? They communicated into, this is what we've learned. Here's what we're doing to make sure that we, we limit this from happening again, or minimize the impact from happening again. We know cyber event is going to happen. If any customer tells you otherwise, you can go through that and know that that's not true. But making sure that you have the right plan, making sure that you're addressing the issues, is what the customers want to see, right? They want to make sure that you're transparent to them, and then the faster you can do that is always the winning game.
Was there anything that surprised you? And I mean, I got to imagine lots of interesting conversations with customers, but were there any ones that like stood out to you or surprised you while you were doing the sort of the transparency, which I agree with, by the way, but the transparency talks?
No, I think some of them is just awareness and education. I think at some point you'll talk to leaders that may not feel the same way, or feel like that shouldn't happen, or it's more not the incident shouldn't happen, but the speed maybe to communicate and the things like that. It's needed. I think those are the kind of things that you refine as you learn about security incidents, and then change your iteration of how do you make sure that your customers understand what's happening, and then you're also protecting them in many ways. This is why sometimes you need to create that overall strategy to be able to bring them on.
So I remember when you first started, and you and I had met, I want to say like 2 or 3 months before you actually started at UKG, but now getting in and looking at the current state, we've talked about like picking up and sort of addressing the sort of immediate issues, but like now thinking longer term, what are your priorities now in terms of taking the architecture, which I believe is sort of somewhat on-prem, somewhat on cloud, but start with like, what are the controls, initiatives you have, and then how does that also lead into sort of the broader transformation going on with cloud adoption?
I mean, I think you might think that, I'm going to go like super sophisticated and tell you all this fun stuff. I just say you have to do...
Well, you got to say zero trust.
Yeah. You got to do the basics.
Nobody gets
right,
swag.
Right? It's the fundamentals, right? The most sophisticated security is the fundamentals, right? Asset visibility is an example, right? No matter how much controls you have, no matter how much sophisticated it could be, if you left an asset unmanaged, that could be the vector to your environment. So if you ask me what am I doing or what I've been doing, is making sure we do the fundamentals right. The fundamentals, knowing where your asset is. Do you have controls over it, the traditionals, the MFA of the wall, making sure that you have the right controls on your endpoint to detect, and then visibility at your SOC or incident response level to be able to respond to this. Now, the response can become something that continuously bog you down, so you need to start to think about how do you make sure that that's automated. How do you do some automated response to reduce that noise, to allow your team to start looking for stuff or hunting in some capability-wise.
Got it, right. Now, I know detection and response is something that I think we spend a lot of time on. I don't think that's ever going to end. One of the things I think is unique about this, well, not unique, but recently, even folks in the room may have heard. So in July, there was a $6.8 million settlement between the class action suit that was brought and then you settled by UKG with respect to this event. I'm curious, like, what was that experience like? How does putting that communication how did that communication get put together? How did how did that sort of land or settle, if you will, in terms of like internally for your team and what it meant?
So that was $6 million, by the way.
$6 million. Sorry.
Yeah, but
thank you for the credit.
This just goes back to this was not UK. This is our customer's customer, like you suing Google because you didn't get your paycheck for like 2 months and you need to pay your bills for whatever reason.
Right.
And then we worked with companies to really make sure that we're taking care of our customers as well, right? So that's a key reason why that happened. But this tells you, right, after 2 years of the incident, you're still paying an amount. So when someone is calculating the risk of a cyber, it's like, oh, your cyber cost is this, so this is your insurance cost. You need to talk about the residual cost that you don't know about, insurance, lawsuits, or whatever that could potentially come out of the woodworks that you may know. So these are the kind of things that you'll see that you should think about as part of your incident response plan in terms of how do you calculate what is the impact to the business from a cyber risk, right? So that's really the key, I think. But more importantly is also, providing the trust to the community and our customers that, UKG is not only doing that, but also we're building a security program that I'm sharing with customers, I'm sharing with Mandy, and that I've learned with other groups and other teams, and then we can share that with everyone else that will learn from it.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting about, if you read the sort of briefing that, that was used to announce their settlement was they actually did mention we were investing X dollars in cyber, and it was a significant number when compared to the actual settlement amount. It was like almost 20% or 20%, I want to say, roughly, close to it, which I thought was unique.
Well, it's 2 years after, right? There's a lot of security investment that
already
happened
been made
prior, and they have been made, then will continue to be made. And security is a core fundamental part of our business, right? Because of just how critical it is in terms of critical infrastructure as well.
Yeah. Well, I think two interesting things. One is folks don't know this, but your boss is a former CISO.
Yes.
You've got a post-breach CISO on your board.
Yes.
Right. Sorry, I don't want to get you in trouble with it.
No,
their names out of here.
I have the best board ever. I can tell you that on the cyber board perspective. But that just tells you the amount of unique skills and experience within the board of this is why as a UKG is really looking at security and invested, because in our board we have 4 or 5 people with more than 100 years of experience in terms of cyber perspective, right? So not only that the things that we put forward needs to be crystal clear, it needs to make sense into the risk that we're also trying to solve. No one has that type of kind of board, I can tell you out there.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'd be comfortable having a boss like Scott and then a board with Jamil on it, because I think everyone would be looking over my shoulder being like, wait, you want to do multi-factor authentication? Why not quadruple multi-factor authentication?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things I love about that, you talk about Scott, who's a former 3-time CISO, and he came from, McAfee, and then you have Jamil with Equifax. Just the experience they have on a day-to-day basis. I'm just talking those two, combined with what we're doing, just give you context, right, to why it's important for you not only to have the right group, but also the right board, because I think they help as well in many cases.
Yeah, no, I think it's been an interesting ride. Just to sort of see where you've come and how it's going, and now where we're at 2 years down the line. But I do think when I think of UKG now, I think of a very securities forward organization, and we've done sort of similar talks in the past. But like in that sense, I guess having the support that you have, where do you see things now going? I know cloud transformation is a big part of what you're doing. I think we talked earlier, and I actually was not quite as familiar as this as I should have been. But it's all off-prem now into cloud is the plan at UKG. But how do you how are you factoring in your security program going forward, knowing that you've got this wild amount of support plus a transformative business opportunity? What's the opportunity next for you in this?
So UKG is a SaaS company, right? As a SaaS company, cloud optimization and transformation is always a key. It's a continuous iteration, right? Google throws stuff at me every other week with a new product, right? So I need to figure out what works, right? Yeah, right. So in terms of innovation as well, not only the products, but the innovation they're bringing in, that you have to sometimes think about what's my strategy in the next 3 years in terms of my cloud security and optimization. There's a lot of products, a lot of technologies out there, but our core piece in terms of what we're doing is how do we provide a secure software platform to our customers. And this span across our cloud infrastructure, our private clouds, and our public clouds infrastructure, right? Because we provide this to different customers, from government to private sectors. So it has to make sense in terms of our cloud journey, our partnership with Google. We've partnered with Google a couple of years ago, where Google is one of our #1 partners in the collaborations we're doing. You've heard about the Gen AI, which is talked about at Next. But not only that, from a security perspective, right? Mandy and our group work closely in terms of really building security capabilities, threat intel, response, across our platforms or environments to make sure that we're ahead of the game.
Yeah, no, I think everything I've seen just sort of from the sidelines has been very security first, forward, and thoughtful, but I do appreciate it. Just like, I guess my last question is just like, if you were to summarize, the 2 or 3 things that stand out to you most about coming in when you did and what you've done over the last 2 years that you think would be important for other people to know or to sort of be able to reflect on, what would you say they would be?
Yeah, so timeline is just coming in, just talking to the group, right? Understanding the core piece of your team. That's fundamental. So you need to know what's happening. The second piece was really going down into the assumptions that right? Because sometimes when you come in, there's a lot of assumptions that you think is really like poking into those and making sure that you are going through the fluff, and then there's nothing there that is a gotcha. You have to be able to talk to your leadership in business, right? Also manage expectations, right? What are the challenges they have? What do they think that are key issues? And then you take that, map it with the risk to the organization by really identifying some of those risks. So that's the timeline I've done. So talk to the team, understand some of the core issues, talk to the business leadership, and then tie back to a risk assessment that's your company has done in the past. When I get there, just Mandy and I've done one, some other companies have done one, took all of that and then create one, and then reevaluate it myself. So now I have a baseline of here's my risk across the organization. So these are tactical risk, by the way. And then you'll go back and talk to the business and say, here are the things that I think are challenges. Tactically speaking, these are the key areas that I think we should work on. And then have the bigger picture in terms of what should we work on over a period of time. Because you should be able to understand if you have challenges across the board, if they take a year or 2 to fix, just don't sit on it, right? Work with your leadership to make sure that you have timeline and understand the key things. So those are the key things that I've done. Then the next phase is really understanding talent, skills, right? What do we have that we need to do? Do we have the talent? Do we have the technology? Do we have the support from outside to be able to say, here are the issues that we have, and then we're going to tackle them this way. We have the resources, and then we have the funding to be able to execute on that. Fundamentally, that's what I've done, and then you're going to continue to do that all the time. It's an iterative perspective. Yeah. But also, you're going to understand that I'm a SaaS company. You have to apply the same thing on the software as well in terms of developers' access, control, source control management, and what's going into the product, and how customers. And then the last piece is customer experience, right? As a security officer, you should understand how your customers are logging in, right? What's the experience there? And then are you creating the right capabilities for them? And then giving security for them to be able to leverage, like providing customers with MFA to their tenants to make sure that they're using it. So we actually enforce tenant MFA for administrators for customers now. Hmm.
You almost said zero trust there, so.
I try not.
Close. Well, so we're at the end of our session. Thank you. That was perfect. Any questions for us? Or for him? You can ask me whatever. I probably won't answer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did you at any point bring in an outside firm to coordinate the PR throughout this process? Oh, all right.
Yes. So the question was, did we have any outside PR firm to coordinate the communication process?
Yeah, I'm just curious at what point you made the decision to bring that in, or how that went.
So I wasn't there, but from everything that I read in all the details, there's always that as part of our communication strategy is an internal communication and an external communication. as well as social media communication. So there's like a combination of all that is handled at the PR level when you hit the crisis management piece. What we've done now is we've looked at that again and did a exercise to see how that would really work in many cases. But you typically would need a PR firm that could help you for the external face if you don't have that in-house. Not only that, you need to think about it in different other scenarios, right? Critical infrastructure down, you're unable to send the communications out, and then how do you really deal with things like ransomware event in that case, and do you have a negotiator or not? All of that are part of our crisis management plan.
Cool. Thanks.
You bet. There's one in the back.
Yeah, thanks for this talk. How did you handle larger companies and likely their cybersecurity teams wanting direct information from you and like making time for that with all of your normal IR?
Yeah, absolutely. I think larger companies are always the easier to deal with because they really are dealing with the same thing I'm dealing with on a daily basis, or they understand some of the magnitudes. I think for us is really creating the quickly understanding what's happening, understanding the IOCs, who's attacking or what we've seen, and sharing that with them. When we talk to large companies, typically they want to understand, okay, what's going on and where it's coming from, and is that coming, or can that spill into my environment, things like that. So information sharing, I think, is one of the key things that we will typically see in large companies. But how do we deal with them is just the same process we have for it's communication, is opening that dialogue of conversation if they need to in any cases, and providing context to the impact to their environment if there is any. More importantly, from a security standpoint, is sharing what we learn immediately. So if we see an IOC or we see an IP that could be potentially bad, then we'll actually share that with some of our security customer teams because we have their information as part of our incident response plan.
Cool. Please.
Now, you've definitely made mention of a lot of executive support post-breach.
Yes.
Did you find you had to change the culture of the company? Or you also mentioned assessing the talent. Was it just bad luck? Or did you have to change a lot of things? Now you have the executive support, you have money coming in. Did you really have to change the culture, the technology? Or what did you find, what as you coming in post, was the number one thing you had to bring in?
Oof, that's a good question. So I think the executive support is there. You still have to be able to instill culture in terms of how do you really put security in front. So let's start with our software development practice, right? How do you make sure that security is something that they're thinking on a day-to-day basis? How do we make sure our professional services that are building infrastructure for our customers are thinking about? I think the culture on a day-to-day basis is really walking up the company and talking to somebody and asking them about security, and then seeing their reaction to it. If they point me back to the security team, that's a challenge, right? If they tell me, here's the things that I'm doing to secure my infrastructure and continuously working on it, and I think we're winning. Some of the other things is really, bring in training, not the boring training that Taylor used to do, but bring.
I mean, my training was good. So
Yeah.
A lot of dad jokes. Yeah.
So, but bring in training into more context of security, role-based training, right? Making sure that the awareness into potential event. But when you have that magnitude of a cyber event, the company is aware, but it's aware for a period of time, and they start to fade away. So you're gonna have to remind the potential impact of what the impact of cyber event, but you still have to work on the culture. What we've been doing is. It's just not something that we talk about. It's something that we also try to make sure that we emphasize as much as possible from the CEO levels and CEO staff and everyone else within the organization, and drive that. Security is important as much as the sales cycle. So we need to make sure that we understand the key components that what could keep us safe.
So in summary though, did you find you had the talent there and they just needed to be properly oriented? Or did you have to change course and bring in new talent, technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. I had great talent when I joined UKG. There was a great talent, but I had to, based on the things that we wanted to do, we also have to supplement that with unique other talents or skills that we needed. Case and example, detection engineering. We want to be able to write our own detections, right? So, and be able to, based on our environment and what we know. And at some point, you have to bring some unique talents to really help in that. We also had some internally that we've trained, and now, and they've been great since I joined, but we've also added additional context and training for them to be able to get us to where we need to go.
I also think managed services is playing a big role in that too, right?
Yeah, so managed services, and then supplemental work is, we need
Yeah.
something, and we'll tap someone from Andy or Google to help up in.
Well, I think that one of the things that's important about the cloud transformation that doesn't come out and scream out as obvious is the more sort of native, the more stuff that gets moved over from on-prem to cloud, the amount of toil necessary to support it goes down.
Yep.
Increasing amounts of going down if it's deployed on managed services like serverless platforms. And I know that's a big part of the transformation. It doesn't scream obvious, doesn't say, oh, I'm getting more security staff, but honestly, like every time you transition from racked servers in a data center to a service you drop a container on, your security posture is improving dramatically without you even actually realizing it, because you're not patching, you're not maintaining, you're not doing much. So that's a big part of it too. Go ahead, Jeff.
What's an example of something you reflect back on? You say, "Hey, I'm actually glad that I didn't do that." Like, maybe it was in the traditional CISO playbook or the new guy thing to do. What's something you said, "Hey, I know that like you would think to do that, but I'm actually not for these reasons."
I didn't just change tools because I felt like I know the other tool better. I try to focus on that. Sometimes we'll come in and say, "Oh, this product doesn't work." Is that the right thing to do? You have so many things to do, and sometimes the product set is the least of your worry. Is the process, is really digging down into the procedures. It's not the product. Now, if you have like 10 products doing the same thing, that's a different story. But because I just don't like product A, I'm just going to replace product B because that's what I use in the next gig. It's going to take you 6 to a year to actually bring that thing. So focusing is what I did was focus my time on the key things that I think make sense, and the others that I know that they're low-hanging fruit, like product and how is it is the best breed or not is the thing that I didn't do, and I think I'm glad I didn't do that in the beginning because it will give me time to now focus on.
Yeah, I mean, I remember our early conversations. You were squeezing the value out of everything you could because it wasn't a time to flip things from
Correct.
One thing to another until you actually understood what was going on. I think that goes back to the earlier point, like, in these situations, it's oftentimes the worst thing to do is walk in and be like, it's all garbage, burn it down to the ground and start over. It's actually, and that includes tools, it's not just people, right? But yeah, squeezing value out of the investment you have, improving signal, not reducing or increasing it, but improving it to just get better. And I know that, the event that we talked about that I didn't go into super amount of detail is, but, obviously, in hindsight, everything is preventable once you understand how it happened. I think in this case, understanding how to detect and evict threat actors that are in your infrastructure is a priority. We all know it is. And that's certainly an area I think that is almost always an initial focus.
No, absolutely. And I think information sharing, I would rather say it's critical. We don't do that often. We don't do that very well. We keep it always in-house. It's important to share as much as you can with the security. The first thing I ask him when we sit here is this been recorded? The reason is how much can we share? Because we need to provide context, right. To the people that are watching and the people that are in the room to provide what have we learned and what are we doing and how do we continue to improve on that so we, security community, can continue to excel. Yeah.
All right, we have a minute left. We have probably time for one short question, or
there's two.
Yeah, no, two.
I'll be quick. I'm curious if the CISO role that you walked into, is that a newly created role as a result of the breach itself?
No. So no. UKG had a CISO that was outgoing before I get there, and then we had a time and spent time to really do information sharing before I get there. But it has nothing to do with the bridge.
Thank you. As a CISO, going into an organization soon after a significant security incident, do you mind to share, at least your interpretation of, what the board expect of you, and how do you make sure that, what you do align with the board's expectations?
Yeah. So in this case, right, I've dealt with the other boards in terms of coming into the organization where the board are already there and asked me to go and do all of this work and provide context to what's the risk of the organization, where should we focus first based on the input from the business and so on. For UKG, it's the other way around. I get there before most of the board members on the half of the board on the cyber piece. I think for them is really want to understand the organization as much as I did, right? It's like, tell us the risk that you see. And my boards were CISO-like members, so it's always easier because they ask specific pointer questions of how you're doing it, and then sometimes you even have to show that. But so those are the key things that I think they wanted to understand. What is the risk to the organization? What are the vectors that you have? And how can an attacker get into your environment? And then how do you prioritize remediating those? And what's the control and what's the completeness of that, right? So they focus on that 1% or 2% that we typically, say, okay, we have 100 machines. They have 80 of them had EDR, but the 20 don't. My board doesn't care about the 80. They care about that 20 machines out there. So those are the core things that they wanted to make sure. The other thing is the risk factor, right? To what's our exposure like, and then what's our resiliency plan in terms of how do we get back to our feet in the event of this. And of course, key pieces come to play in testing those and validating it actually is not just on paper, but there is the right response. The last one is, do I have the right skills, investment, people? How long does it take to train my people or bring new people? Those are the key things that they ask, which is lovely as well.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We're out of time. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for coming.